Hello and welcome to another new car reveal video. I seem to do quite a few of these for various reasons. First things first, if you're a big fan of the Golf R32, as I know many of you are, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with the Golf. I haven't traded it in, I haven't got rid of it, I've still got the Golf. It's sat on the driveway right next to this car. This was just a second option, if you will. It was something that I've been interested in for a while. I decided to take the risk and take the plunge and go for it. And I will definitely say straight off the bat, even though we're still in the honeymoon period, I'm definitely mixed on this car for a number of reasons. For the moment, I'm enjoying it, but there are definitely some drawbacks. Some drawbacks I already knew, but they're kind of worse than I knew about. I don't regret going for it, you know, much like with the Bentley. And to be clear, there's nothing mechanically wrong with the car, at least for now. It's not like it's broken down or anything. It's just the way this car is, which some of you will have already seen the teasers on Twitter and Instagram of what this model is. Some of you will have probably recognized the interior. You can see something out the rear window, which kind of gives it away a little bit. But this is a first for me in many ways. This is the first Japanese car I've ever owned. It is the smallest engine car I've owned now. The Golf was the smallest, which 3.2 is still pretty big. This is a 2-litre. And this is another one of the cars that I've had, which is full-time four-wheel drive. So the Bentley was, or I believe the Bentley is, and the Touareg was as well. The Golf is not four-wheel drive. The Golf is technically all-wheel drive, I believe, so it's kind of front-wheel drive most of the time. I do definitely prefer four-wheel drive. I like it full-time. And to spoil it, it's a Mitsubishi Evo. I've bought a Mitsubishi Evo. I've bought one of the least loved Evos, the Evo 7, which has always been a favourite of mine. The 5 and the 7 are my two favourites. And I would have to say that the 7's probably my favourite Evo overall. It's kind of like the R33 Skyline of Evos, though, kind of the less popular one. I also love the R33 Skyline, though. And in particular, the thing which might turn some people off, in fact, it'll turn many people off, and Evo aficionados already know what I'm going to say, is down here. It's a GTA. And for those who don't know what the GTA is, it's basically a Evo with an automatic, put simply. It's a 5-speed automatic Tiptronic, interestingly. So it has the buttons on the steering wheel to change gear, and it has a sequential style shifter where you click the shifter over to the left and you can change gear yourself, much like the Golf and many other cars. So why did I get an Evo at all if I like automatics? Why didn't I just get a manual? And what is this car like? Because not many people even talk about the GTA. Is it just an Evo poser? Is it just like a, 180 horsepower wannabe Evo with an auto gearbox and sluggish acceleration? Well, actually, no. I'm going to do a review for this in Beards and Cars where I'll talk about some of this more in depth. But for now, suffice it to say that the Evo 7 GTA is not a wannabe Evo by any stretch. In fact, Mitsubishi put a lot more effort into this car than they easily could have. I believe they could have done a couple of things maybe a bit better. I believe the GTA, for example, could have been a wagon. That would have made it a little bit more specialised. Whereas what they did do is they fitted it, of course, with the auto. That's the main difference. Interestingly, you can actually swap this straight over with a manual version. You can just drop the manual gearbox into it, and apparently the ECU will just run the manual immediately. So you swap the pedals, swap the box, and you're ready to go. The advantage of that is you can essentially have yourself a manual Mitsubishi Evo 7 for half the price of a normal manual Evo 7. So for value for money, it's incredible. It's gone through 2 years of MOTs, no issues whatsoever. Trade owned before me, so I'm the first owner technically it's had in the UK, which is always nice for the history. The body is almost perfect. It's got a very small scrape on the front bumper and a little bit of lacquer peel, which I'm going to get done because the same guy who did some paint work on my Maserati will do a great job on this one, no doubt. It's finished in white, which you'll have probably already seen by this point in the video. Not a colour I would have typically chosen. I'm a huge fan of dandelion yellow on the Evo. It's my favourite colour for it. And I was actually looking at two. There was a white one and a grey one. The grey one needed a bit of work doing, and the guy who owned it didn't want to do the work, so I bought this one instead. This one is lightly modified. It's got a couple of things, excuse me, which I'll probably show you when I do the, interior camera shots. It has a turbo timer to cool down the turbo after you turn the engine off. You can turn that on and off. Basically, it keeps the engine running for 30 seconds, even after you take the key out and lock the car. Like I said, you can turn it off, but it basically means that the turbo gets a chance to cool down a bit more, which is cool. It's got a touchscreen center display, which was one thing I really liked about it, because the other one did not. It was completely standard. And in 2002, you know, I don't bring CDs with me. I'm not listening to the radio. So it's nice to have that. It looks like almost the same display that the Golf R32 had as well, which is pretty cool. It has a GFB G-Force turbo like boost selector on the dash as well. That one's not one that I'm playing around with, because apparently this thing's running, I think, 320 horsepower, or so I've been told. I don't particularly care if it is or not, to be honest, because even standard, and this is where the misconceptions come in, the GTA is not like a 200 horsepower version. This thing still has 270 brakes stock and over 250 pound-feet of torque. So it is not a baby Evo by any stretch. The only reason, in fact, why this has less power than a normal GSR is because Mitsubishi specifically fitted the GTAs with a slightly smaller turbo. And the reason why they did that is to offset the lag of the gearbox. A smaller turbo, of course, spools up quicker. So the acceleration on this thing is actually pretty brutal, and it's also been fitted with a big bore pipe at the back and a screamer manifold as well, or a screamer pipe up front, in other words. I'm not a huge fan of the noise, to be honest. It definitely doesn't sound as good as the Golf. I already knew it wasn't going to, but it's kind of just loud. It doesn't have like a nice tone to it, it's just noisy. So I wouldn't have done that, to be honest, but, you know, it's appropriate to how explosive the acceleration is, I guess. The cornering is incredible on this thing. The Golf is fantastic through corners, but this is a different league. This thing could run rings around the Golf, it really could. The grip is phenomenal. The interior, of course, is Japanese, so there's a lot of plastic, a lot of cloth. I will say the seats are actually more comfortable than the Golf, because the wing backs look lovely in the R32, but they are very constricted. I think I mentioned that in my announcement video for it. In this one, it's just got like normal car seats. So they're comfy, they're roomy, it's easy to get in and out of. Yeah, it's an easier car to be in than the Golf is, for sure. The Golf looks more stylish, but this has more room. The headroom is fantastic in this thing. Rear seats, of course, have far more space. The boot is really good as well. So yeah, it's fantastic for space. It feels very simple in its approach, which it is, and the advantage of that is there's not as much to go wrong. You know, it's no Bentley, that's for sure. In terms of downsides though, and the reason why I'm not sure how long I'm going to keep this one for, I already knew that the fuel economy was bad on Evos, but now that I've actually got this one and had it for a couple of days, it really is bad. Like, it's another level of bad fuel economy. On the way home, because for those who don't know, these have a very small fuel tank, it's 10 gallons. That's UK gallons, which is different to American. I think it's 40 litres or 45 or something like that, which is a tiny tank. This thing's like 2 gallons smaller than the Golf R32. And because of the fact that it is so small, the gauge drops real quick. So on the way home, I filled up the tank from where I purchased the car. It was 160 miles away. And to do those 160 miles took me half a tank. That didn't seem too bad to me, because 320 miles out of a 10-gallon tank, I would say, is pretty damn good for an Evo. The downside is, I then, the next day, which was yesterday, made a trip in this car that was a 40-mile round trip, and that 40 mile, not at motorway speeds, because of course motorways are more efficient, on normal roads, that 40-mile round trip took a quarter of a tank. So that meant that in normal driving conditions, and I was not pushing the car at all, I was just driving it normally with very little throttle, it was doing 16 miles per gallon, which is ridiculously bad. Even the Bentley was better than that on average. So ironically, it's ended up being kind of like a sports car. It's very hot, it's very loud, it has all those smells that you'd expect from like the Goodwood Festival of Speed coming off the engine. You can see the heat rising from the bonnet intakes. It's harsh on the suspension. It's, you know, incredible on the grip, brutal on the performance, brutal on the sound. It's essentially a sports car. And of course, it's very good at what it does. The problem is, I don't know, it's almost more taxing than I expected it to be in the car. I enjoy it very much, and there's no way of saying this without it being misinterpreted. You know, I love the car. I love what it can do. I have tons of respect for it, and I still love the Evo 7. But even with the automatic, even with, you know, you could say more comfort options, quote unquote, that the GTA is supposed to have, which certainly doesn't feel like it would be any different, it's just so raw. I think maybe this kind of car just isn't really my style. The Golf R32 feels like a Bentley compared to this thing. The Golf is so much more refined and more comfortable, and that's crazy to say that in comparison, but this thing really does feel like a WR car on the street, which is exactly what it is. It's the difference between the Golf and this. The Golf is designed to be fun. This is designed to win, and competition trumps everything else. This car has no time for style, no time for cool factor, no time for luxury or comfort. It is totally focused on dominating performance, and that goes even for the automatic. Now, one of the things I've noticed, not many people seem to talk about how quick the acceleration is on the auto version. I'm sure some people have, but the GSR, you know, the full 280 brake manual gearbox version, can do 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds apparently. Very impressive for that amount of power. This, of course, is not going to be that quick. Even if it is running 320 brake, it's still probably not going to be as quick as that. I am, however, going to do a 0 to 60 run on it, all going well, to see what it can actually do, because I'm really curious. It definitely has a hell of a lot of lag, I will say that. Not so much if you put it in manual mode, but you can definitely feel that more dated turbo lag that this thing has to deal with, even with that smaller, quicker spooling turbo. So, yeah, I mean, it's an amazing bit of kit, but it definitely feels every bit as primitive as it is, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. It's not a bad car. This is not like the Bentley situation, it's not like the Maserati situation, because it is great. It hasn't broken down. It is a fantastic car for performance. Everyone looks at it, everyone compliments it. I get random people being like thumbs up in the street to it. But it's just so different to my style of car, which is why I wanted to try something different. Maybe this just isn't my style. Maybe I'm just not a JDM guy. And I know not all JDM is the same, but I know a lot of them have a similar kind of vibe to this. Other JDM which I've driven in the past, mostly slightly newer stuff than this, but yeah, it's a mixed bag. You know, like the Supra that I drove, the A80, lovely car, totally different to this. Much more refined, much more smooth, but much more expensive as well. In the case of a Supra, I would be very keen to drive a Skyline though. In particular, one of the automatic 4-door Skylines. So maybe that's something more my vibe, you know, like one of the R34, like the Blitz Skyline drift car, like in the old Gran Turismo games. But yeah, it's an incredible machine, and I will be doing a Beards and Cars review on this thing. So that'll be, of course, more objective, putting my own personal taste to one side a bit more and really focusing on the true, absolute good and bad stuff about it. So the camera might be a little bit juddery because I'm clearly driving at the moment, and I'm not driving the Evo, as you'll be able to probably easily tell. I'm actually driving the Golf, the R32. The reason why I'm adding this footage to the video, which I wouldn't have usually done, is because in addition to the thoughts that I already put out in the Evo's, you know, original footage, I then drove the Evo a little bit more after talking yesterday, and I feel like it's just going to be one of those cars that kind of goes back and forth a little bit for me in terms of like, do I like this, don't I like this, what do I like or dislike about this? Because after driving it again yesterday, I feel like something clicked into place almost for me, because I think what was wrong with the Evo wasn't the car, it was my expectations for the car. So because the Evo 7 GTA didn't turn out as quite what I was expecting it to be, I was disappointed. That's not the car's problem, that's my problem. Just like when you go in to watch a movie and say, well, I was expecting this or that from the movie. Well, that's not the movie's fault, and it's not the director's fault or the writer's fault. That's the viewer's fault for having the wrong expectations. That's why it's always good to go in as blind as you can to watch a film. So with the car, after driving it again yesterday, I went on a nice little run with it. Funnily enough, the fuel economy ended up being a little bit better than it was the day before for some reason. Maybe I'd let the car warm up more. But I actually found I enjoyed it a lot more when I realigned my expectations and also realigned what I wanted from the car. So the way I'm viewing the Evo 7 at the moment is, well, I think to give some clarity, my original plan for the Evo was to see how it was, potentially use it as a daily, and then my concern was that the Golf might get neglected, because if the Evo can do everything that the Golf can do, then I probably wouldn't end up using the Golf that much. There were one or two things that I already knew the Golf was going to be better at. So for example, the fuel economy was always going to be better. I suspected it would be more comfortable and smoother, all of which is true. I knew it would have a better gearbox, which it does, and the sound on the Golf is better as well. The Evo sounds cool, especially when you really push it and the car takes a little bit too long to change gear, so it goes like before it changes gear, which sounds awesome. But overall, the Golf sounds better, and I would say as an all-round car, not as a performance car, but just as a car, the Golf is better, without question. As a performance car, of course, the Evo will run rings around it, but basically what I've landed on as a conclusion is that I do a bit of driving now and then as part of my work. Technically my work to do with YouTube, although it tends to be an aspect of it that you don't see as much. So I do a decent amount of miles, and those miles would cost me double the fuel costs on the Evo compared to the fuel costs in the Golf. So essentially what I'm going to do, and we're going to see how this goes, is I'm going to use the Golf, or continue to use the Golf as my daily driver, and then use the Evo as more of a sports car. So kind of take the Evo out on sunny days, maybe use it to get shopping and groceries in every so often, use it maybe to go to car meets or car shows, the Haynes Breakfast Club. I'm planning to use the Evo to drive to Goodwood for the Festival of Speed this year, and you know, stuff like that. Kind of use the Evo and treat the Evo and think of it as more of a sports car than a daily driver. For some of you that may be an obvious thing to say, but for me, I was imagining that the Evo would be just a little bit more civilized than it actually is. It's not a TVR or a Caterham or something like that, or an Ariel Atom, of course, but by the standards of a car that I would usually drive, it's very, very raw. It is just about performance and very little else. So if I approach it with the mentality of a sports car, then I actually like it a lot more. Because if you think about it, a sports car would have the smells of the engine, the heat, the uncomfortable suspension, the loud noises that are maybe sometimes a little obnoxious, performance which is brutal, fuel economy which isn't very good. And yes, you could use it every day, but it's not really fully inclined toward that. Well, everything I just said sounds like something like a TVR anyway. That's exactly what the what the Evo even feels like. So I think now that my expectations are changed and altered, now that I know what the car is actually like, and especially after driving it again for this reveal video to get some more footage, I'm actually liking it more again. So to me, I'm actually more hopeful now of keeping the Evo for a bit longer. Now, I'm not going to set a time, you know, I'm not going to say, oh, I want to keep this for this long, I want to keep it forever, I want to get rid of it soon, or anything like that. But I'm just going to see how it goes, basically. I think that's the best course of action. I definitely don't plan to get rid of the Golf anytime soon, because it's just a fantastic car. But the Evo, we'll see. I've gone from loving it to not liking it so much to really liking it again in the span of about 72 hours. And that hasn't happened with any of my other cars. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. For the moment, I think with those realigned expectations, I'm going to end up liking the Evo more now that I know what to expect and how to get the best out of it. I think the Evo is one of those cars which I'm going to enjoy more in small doses, because it feels more special if you do that. Kind of like driving a supercar. If you use a supercar as your daily driver, you start to notice all the things about it which aren't that great. Whereas if you use it as something special, which the Evo is, it is in effect a rally car on the street, well then I think I'll enjoy it more. But ultimately, that's it for my new car reveal. Stick around, of course, for the Beards in Cars review, and potentially for a 0 to 60 test as well. And who knows? I've said in the past about stuff like the Bentley, oh, I'm going to have this car for so long, and then it doesn't work out. So maybe this time when I say I'm not going to keep this car for a long time, maybe I'll end up loving this thing and keeping it for ages. Who knows? You never know how it's going to pan out. But that's it for this vid. Thanks for stopping by. Of course, stick around for more on the channel. And until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.